Good. Well, let's dive into the SEC championship. And I so much, not as much as you, but I so much wanted the Gators to win over Florida State to set up a possible chance to get into the college football playoff. I would have made the argument with two losses and having defeated LSU, Florida State, and Alabama consecutively. The Gators earned that as winning possibly the best conference in college football. That hasn't happened. So we've got a Florida team that for the second consecutive year, Dave, and we've talked about it, outside of the quarterback position, this appears to be, for someone like me that tries to watch all the games and see everything that's going on, looks like a similar Gator team. Relies on defense, the great secondary, the special teams. You got the better kicker. You didn't have one last year. But difference at quarterback and more of a pocket passer and more of a consistent player in Austin Appleby versus Treon Harris. But kind of compare the Gators right now and the way this season played out versus kind of what you expected.
Really, of course, it was Luke Del Rio coming into the season, not Austin Appleby. And from all the talk of Jim McElwain sounded pretty confident in what he had Luke Del Rio transferring in. Even rumors before the season started that if he had been available to play last year, he would have started over Will Grier. I don't think anybody in the world believes that right now with what we've kind of seen happen to Luke Del Rio and how he kind of faltered down the stretch, especially after he got hurt. Did that have anything to do with how he played after the fact? Maybe so. But, Austin Appleby came in, stepped in. He played a Tennessee game, led him to a 21-0 lead. Offense got conservative. Tennessee's defense got hot. And we know what happened there. Played very next week at Vanderbilt. He's not the only quarterback that would struggle against that Vanderbilt defense. We've seen it. So, then Luke Del Rio comes back for a couple games, gets injured again. He hasn't played since the Arkansas game. Austin Appleby has started the last 3 games for the Gators against South Carolina, where he looked good. I think Florida offense used his legs a little bit. Should have scored more points in that game than they did. But a turnover in a goal line situation. But then the very next week, didn't play great at LSU, but had the one big 98-yard touchdown pass to freshman wide receiver Tyree Cleveland. But he only had 7 completions that game, 7 of 17, I believe. So, not necessarily the greatest stats there as well. And then we saw completely where he had no time to throw against Florida State. And when he did have time to throw, he missed open receivers down the field. There were plays there for Florida to make. Even as bad as it looked, there were plays there to be made. Austin Appleby just couldn't hit the throws. So it's going into this Bama game with playing against another good defense that's going to suffocate this Gators offensive line. Can the Gators get anything going on offense?
Well, I guess if there's any hope in what we've seen to date, it's the LSU game against Alabama and taking the Tide to a no-score game with about 10 or 12 minutes left, and LSU just played lights out on defense, and we know that those two defenses are comparable, and the two offenses outside of Leonard Fournette, maybe there's some comparisons that can be made there. Alabama appears to be the best team in the country. They appear to basically have no weaknesses. Have you been able to find one?
No. I mean, they are the number 1 team in the nation right now for a reason. If anything, you might can point to they've had some injuries in the defensive backfield now, but Florida's not necessarily the team that can take advantage of that. They don't have the quarterback to take advantage of that. Florida's only way to win this game is going to be to ugly it up. It's going to have to be the LSU-Alabama type of game. It's going to have to be the Florida-LSU type of game. It's going to have to be a touchdown game at halftime, a field goal game at halftime, either way. If Florida can be up by halftime by a touchdown, they'll take it right now, believe me. There's a lot of things to point to how Florida can do that. First starts with defense. Can the defense show up again? So many injuries, and they keep piling up again. Duke Dawson probably now won't play, so that hurts Florida's base defense. So there's a lot of things to look at as why Florida doesn't have a chance in this game, but we keep pointing to the injuries, and we keep pointing to how can the defense keep playing well, and they do. They did their job against Florida State last week. The offense couldn't get anything going. Offense gave them bad field position. So, if you look at this Florida defense, can they do it one more time? Can they rally around Tabor and Wilson and the secondary guys that are so well? Because Jared Davis may give it a go. He's going to try and play. He's the heart and soul of that Gator defense. If he can go, maybe it lights a spark. And if Florida defense plays their best game of the season, maybe they can hold this Alabama offense down to something and keep it an ugly, close game.
The game that we saw last year was pretty much the formula. So that's what you're looking at this year. We're looking at Antonio Callaway had a first half punt return for a touchdown. The defense was spectacular. You had a lead, maybe not at half, but close to half. I think it was like 9-7 at half. And even though statistically Alabama just ran all over Florida, statistically it was lopsided. And by the eyeball test, watching the game, it was lopsided. Hey, it was a one-score game somewhere in the third, fourth quarter, and then Alabama got out to 2 scores and maybe 3, and then Florida threw a long touchdown pass to get within 2. But you were within range for about 3 quarters.
Right. Now, that has to be the formula. And, and we've seen it. We've heard it many times. You give a team that is not supposed to have a chance, and the longer you keep the game close, the more they think they have a chance. And, maybe you get lucky. Maybe one big play. Maybe there's a Jalen Hurts as a true freshman. Maybe this this good Florida secondary can bait him into making a mistake. This defensive line is still playing very good. They're still deep there. Maybe they can shut down the running game. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Jeff Collins plays Jalen Hurts. Does he get aggressive? But your problem there, if you play aggressive, you worry about him maybe busting a run, for 30, 40 yards. Or, if you sit back, do you sit back and let him try and pick you apart? He's not the best passer. We haven't seen him pick many teams apart with his passing game. So I think that's kind of what we'll see. We've seen it the last couple of weeks with this Florida defense. They're not bringing a lot of pressure. They're trying to keep everything in front of them, trying to keep the big play from happening. And while the yardage is kind of racked up, it's kind of worked for the defense. They haven't let up a lot of points. If the offense doesn't turn the ball over like Austin Appleby did last week, where he fumbled deep into their own territory a couple of times and set up some short fields, if Florida plays a turnover-free game like they did at LSU, a very low penalized game like they did against LSU, they'll have another chance to keep this game ugly. And it's asking a lot. You're playing the best team in the nation. Keep going back to this LSU game. Well, we already know Alabama's better than LSU, 10 points better than LSU, and LSU was hyped for that game. So it's yes, these are things I point to that Florida can do to make this a game. Question is, can they? And not many people are giving them a shot.
So you go to your platform of choice here, whether that's SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, and you look up Gators Breakdown. You check out David there, because I track him down anytime I need to talk about Florida football, because he's the guy to talk to. So, David, before we let you go, what do you make of this national mess in terms of the playoff system and the committee selections to date? What do you expect them to do? The Ohio State situation with definitely not winning a conference championship, but being 2 in the country. And, how do you see this thing playing out? What would you value versus what you see maybe the committee valuing at this point?
I'm a big head-to-head proponent. It's what college football is about. What's the use of playing the games if head-to-head doesn't mean anything? But it's so hard to sit here and say Ohio State is not one of the best teams in the nation right now. What is the college football committee, college football playoff committee came out? They said, we're taking the 4 best teams. They didn't say they're taking the 4 best conference champions. So, but my thing is, we don't know what they value. They say they value conference championships, but this is the ultimate test this week, is to see what they value. And 2 years ago, it was, they didn't value, the TCU and Baylor's. They valued, didn't value TCU enough to drop them, 3 or 4 spots, just to drop them completely out of the playoff. And this year, I don't see that happening with Ohio State. They're going to be in the playoff. I don't see any absolute way they're not in. With what the committee was saying, pretty much you could read the tea leaves that they thought Ohio State was one of the 4 best teams in the nation. So what happens with that 4th spot? If Clemson wins, Clemson's in. Do they value a Big Ten champion over a Pac-12 champion? I think that's going to be the deciding factor probably in that 4th spot. Is it another Big Ten team who wins the title, or is it Washington if they win their game against Colorado?
they basically backed themselves up into a corner and led us to where we are now when there was a line of one-loss teams, and they put Ohio State at number 2 in front of all of them. And then Ohio State runs a table, and how do you possibly, and I know, I've heard all week, TCU, they did it to TCU, completely different situation. TCU was number 3. They beat Kansas. Kansas, one of the 5 worst teams in the country, the final day of the season, and they got dropped back to number 6 because teams were winning conference championships and leapfrogging them with better resumes. Ohio State just beat the number 3 team in the country. So consider Alabama hasn't lost a game. Ohio State and Penn State basically have the 2 best victories, according to the College Football Playoff Committee, in the nation because they beat the number 2 and 3 teams in the country. So I could even argue that Michigan shouldn't be dropped from number 3 to 5 because they just lost to the number 2 team on the road in double overtime. But that's for another day.
One question, if you don't mind. Yeah. What happens if Clemson and Washington lose?
Okay. Clemson and Washington lose. If I'm running the show, Bama's in, the Big Ten champs in, Ohio State's in, Colorado's in.
Okay. Michigan beat Colorado.
Michigan did beat Colorado. Colorado won a Pac-12 championship game and won the conference and won one more game than Michigan. I get it.
Okay.
But I would understand that argument. And that's the interesting factor in this that Michigan has is there are 3 teams playing conference championship games this weekend that Michigan beat, and they've got the same record as those 3 teams. It's great. I love it. It's a mess.
Yep.
And really, the only way I figured out that it's not going to be a mess is if Washington wins, Clemson wins, and I guess if Wisconsin wins, because at least Ohio State can say we beat them head-to-head and we've got a better record. So even though the Badgers have the Big Ten championship, it would be Ohio State, Washington, Clemson, Alabama. That's about the cleanest situation that can result this weekend. All right, David Waters from Gators Breakdown. Join him on SoundCloud, YouTube, or iTunes, and you get your fill of SEC football, specifically the Florida Gators. All right, David, thanks for jumping on.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, so this has been a pilot launch of Mark Rogers TV's College Football Coast to Coast. Will come your way every Wednesday night. You can join us at this point on Facebook Live or on YouTube Live. Thanks to my crack director, Marty McPadden, getting the job done. Join us throughout the week. We've got videos on YouTube for college football fans all across the country, every team, every conference, breaking it down with bloggers and broadcasters that bring you the insight that only they can for their particular team and conference. Everybody out there, please enjoy championship weekend. It should be a great one regardless of who you're rooting for, and this is why we love college football. See you next week.